Today, Apple CEO Tim Cook announced the company's latest smartphones, the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 10, which he claims is
the biggest leap forward since the original iPhone.
It's got Face ID, Super Retina display, and no home button. And today's Apple event comes a few weeks after Samsung unveiled their new phone, the Galaxy Note 8. It's got a bunch of new similar features too, and of course, the S Pen. But smartphones weren't always like this. Phones weren't always like this. In fact, this is a cell phone. Or more accurately, it was a cell phone. My dad used to have one of these, but technology advances quickly. When I was a young lad growing up, this turned into this. It's an example of Moore's Law, that every 2 years, processors will double in speed. And as this happens, our phones get smaller, faster, and smarter. This is my first cell phone, the 3285 by Nokia that was released in the year 2001. And at the time, I thought it was the bee's knees because having any kind of mobile phone was a huge deal. And depending on your age, something like this brick or a flip phone was probably your first phone too. And 6 years later, 2007, we went to this, the original iPhone. A device that changed phones as we know it. Quick side note. I'm not going to be arguing that the iPhone is the best phone. That is up to personal preference. I am a huge fan of the Galaxy S8. And additional footnote. Full disclosure, Casey Neistat is a spokesman for Samsung. However, Samsung has no involvement in Beme.
No, I think that iPhone's a fine phone. I carry an iPhone and an Android phone. I just think Android's a better operating system. Samsung makes better hardware than...
And the iPhone wasn't even the first touchscreen phone, but it did disrupt an industry and kick off the era that we currently live in of what we think of as mobile phones. Before the iPhone, this was a smartphone. Keyboard, tiny screen that needed a stylus, or didn't even have touch capability at all. In 2006, 64 million smartphones were sold. By 2008, that number had more than doubled to 139.3 million. With Apple becoming the third largest smartphone manufacturer in a little over a year. 2008 was also the year the first Android device came out. And since smartphones were thought of as an extension of a business lifestyle, this new vision for phones was met with a lot of pushback. My personal favorite example is what then Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer had to say.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
I find myself forgetting what our digital lives were like 11 or even 12 years ago. Unless you had a phone with a keyboard, like this BlackBerry here, you had to use T9 to text. That meant going through 3 letters per number key until you got the right one, and you had to browse some weird version of the internet, or phones with antennas. But there are other aspects too that have become a standard part of life that 10 years ago was entirely foreign. For example, pinching to zoom into an image.
And so I can just move them further apart and stretch the image.
And that was huge at the time. No one had seen really anything like that on a personal device. But smartphones, these kinds, not these kinds, didn't just disrupt our lives, it also disrupted businesses and business models. If you had a phone, you now had an MP3 player, a navigation tool for your car, and you also had a pretty decent point and shoot that has only gotten better. As of 2016, 98.4% of digital cameras sold were smartphones. In 2007, the same year as the original iPhone, text messages sent surpassed phone calls placed for the very first time. And in 2014, data became the main source of revenue for mobile carriers. And now when I tell someone I'm going to call them, I usually still make this hand sign. But I remember hanging out with my friend and his 6-year-old daughter, and she said she was going to call grandma, and she held her hand like this. Because to her, this is a phone. To me, this is a phone. But it's also like hang loose. This is a transitional device. Served no purpose besides to get me from there to here. But home phones, I haven't even had one of these since high school. And in the last month, consisting of 720 hours, I used my phone as a phone for 8 of them. 28% of smartphone owners don't even make a single phone call in a week. The smartphone has killed the phone. And the iPhone didn't create this environment by itself, but it did start the fire. Snapchat, Instagram, WhatsApp, Square, Angry Birds, none of those things existed before the smartphone. And phones haven't changed that much since the first iPhone was released 10 years ago. They're still rectangular and touch-based and basically still very high-powered computers that fit in your pocket. And there definitely have been improvements, like you can unlock a phone with a fingerprint, or you can use it to pay for stuff. But those improvements have been very incremental over the past decade. Nothing revolutionary. Revolutionary like the first smartphones were when they first came out. So where do we go from here? What is the next revolution of the smartphone?
So I think the future of smartphones is actually going to be embedded in your body.
The future of phones will be no phones.
I'm telling you, the future's holographic phone. Mark my words, 5 years from now, all phones are going to be holographic.
I'm Jake, and this is Beme News. Have yourself a wonderful life.
Is as easy as looking at it and swiping up. And, let's try that again.